Many people told me that we who came from different republics of the Soviet Union, whether Jewish, Moldovan, Georgian, or any other nationality, are seen by the local population as Russians, and we became toxic. But what does it mean for you personally to become toxic? Friends, if you're watching these videos from New York, Los Angeles, Miami, Houston, Seattle, or from a small town in the heartland, you are part of a huge and very diverse Russian-speaking world in the U.S., from 3 to 5 million, according to different sources. That's a lot. And today I'm going to tell you something that almost no one talks about. But it depends on this whether we will have a normal future here. I'll talk about it closer to the end, so stay tuned. Some people came here back in the 70s, like me, through Jewish emigration, on a professional visa, or for family reunification. Some people arrived here quite recently through work, studies, crossing the border with Mexico, or seeking asylum. Everyone escaped however they could. Some people already have citizenship and a house in the suburbs. The children speak English without an accent and don't really understand what you want from them when you try to speak Russian with them. And of course, they argue with you about politics. Some people have a temporary status, a lawyer who doesn't respond for weeks, and feel that any news from Washington could cut off the branch we're sitting on. And despite all these differences, we have common questions. What's happening in American politics? How will this affect us Russian speakers specifically? How do people here see us? As citizens, as migrants, as a threat, or as a resource? And most importantly, are we here temporarily at all? Or are we building a real life? Well, for those who have been here for 40 or 50 years, this question is probably already settled. But for those who, the younger ones still, many of them say, oh, when something changes there, or if something changes there, then we'll see. By the way, I'll say right away that a bit later I'll go over a typical mistake Russian speakers in the U.S. make that causes people to get stuck in temporary status for years and don't even notice how they're missing out on opportunities. That will be in the second half of the video. Watch till the end so you don't repeat other people's mistakes, so you don't fall into the same traps as others. One more thing, don't forget to click the bell under the video, please. It's just a way to get new episodes on time. That way, important things about your life as a Russian speaker in the U.S. won't pass you by. The U.S., Russia, and U.S. in between. Let's start from the top level.
Отношения между США и Россией.
Whether we like it or not, any new wave of tension between Washington and Moscow almost always reaches us. Our work, our banks, our neighbors, our kids at school. Right now, these relations mean sanctions, limited contacts, threatening rhetoric, and confrontation. Constant discussions about war, European security, the role of the U.S., political struggle inside America itself about how to properly approach Russia. Why is this important to us, Russian speakers living, well, let's say in the U.S., in Europe, and even in Israel, actually, not to mention Australia? First of all, it's a matter of trust. After every major scandal, cyber attacks, spy stories, election interference, the media brings up the topic of the Russian threat again. And they don't say, but don't pay attention. You know, those who fled from this very Russian threat came to us. Automatically, we become part of this Russian threat, possibly. And somehow we end up associated with this image, even if we left precisely because we disagree with that system. Secondly, the financial and legal consequences. Some people face extra checks at the bank, questions about the source of their funds, like, where did you get this money? Like, excuse me, just to be sure, you're not with the mafia, are you? With block transfers, yeah, how many times has that happened to me? It's like, I've been working with artists for many years now, probably almost 30, and when something sells, I have to send them money. Problems start when the artist is from Russia. Somewhere at the algorithm level, like Russia, Russian, an address in Russia automatically falls into a high-risk zone. Thirdly, the political image of Russia inside the U.S., for some politicians, being tough on Moscow is a way to show that they're really serious. For others, it's a reason to accuse their opponents of being soft or having ties to the Kremlin. Well, we all know who our country's Putin's biggest henchman is. In all these games, the subtle differences between the Russian government and Russian-speaking people are often erased. A little later, I'll explain exactly how this image affects our chances of getting the status we need. Jobs, access to certain professions, especially for those who work in IT, in government contracts, or in so-called sensitive industries. This is a very practical thing, and many people don't know about it, gentlemen. And yes, let me remind you once again, if you want to get these analyses on time, click the bell, and the platform will automatically send you the new episode, so you won't have to catch up on important information later. It runs away from you, you try to catch up, but you can't quite reach it. Who are Russian speakers in the US, really? If you take a closer look at us, it becomes clear that there is no single Russian diaspora. There are several large, very different waves. First, there are the old immigrants, people who came at the end of the USSR from the 70s to the 90s. Yours truly, many have citizenship, their own businesses, homes, and a well-established way of life for them, for us. For me, Russia is this, but it's not today's Kremlin. The country of my childhood, that's where the language is, the songs, some memories. That's where walks in the summer garden are. In my case, in winter, for example, in Leningrad. Yes, today it's St. Petersburg. But the news still affects me, especially when it comes to war, sanctions, worries, and problems. The second wave, well, let's call it the new wave of specialists. IT engineers, doctors, scientists, startups, students. They came on work and student visas, they have a good education, English, and a career path. But it is exactly them who more often face the fact that a Russian Federation passport suddenly becomes a risk factor, and when extending their status during employer checks, when leaving and entering the country, some problems and unclear issues arise. The third group consists of political and military refugees, journalists, activists, and volunteers, people who have had cases opened against them, who have been threatened, or who have already faced the use of force. For them, America is not just a land of opportunity, but a chance to survive, and their main concern is both fear and the economy. The question is, can I really be sure they won't send me back to our so-called homeland and leave me without this? In other words, I went through difficult routes across the border in camps. These people are often stuck in the asylum system for years, waiting for a decision, living in a state of being neither here nor there, with intense anxiety and exhaustion. And on top of all that, of course, there are children, school, English language, English as a first language, English as a second language, and Russian spoken at home, and classmates' jokes, bullying, conversations about the war, whoever it is, even if they're from Ukraine, what is the border? You kill many teenagers. The main question is not who is to blame, but who am I, me, who, why? It's important to talk about this now because a bit later we'll get to something that almost no one does. How these groups can get out of their bubbles. I'll speak for myself, I don't know. Out of their own shells and boxes and start helping each other. It may seem abstract, but in reality it changes the odds with documents, the quality of life, the influence on local politics, and Russia's pressure on the diaspora. Many people thought that if you're in the US you can finally relax, but Russia often manages to reach even here. What does that look like in practice? There are criminal cases, status issues, being labeled a foreign agent or extremist, and more. A person from the US talks about the war, helps independent media, participates in protests, but at the same time in Russia, a case is opened against them and they are added to various registries. Physically, you walk the streets of America and seem to have nothing to do with them, but in Russian documents, you are already an enemy. How this will turn out later, I don't know. Second, the family faces pressure, searches at the parent's home, talks with relatives, and subtle hints. Tell him to keep quiet. She shouldn't get involved in politics. By the way, do you have grandchildren here? That is often more powerful than any official document. People start censoring themselves so they don't put their loved ones at risk. It's natural and understandable. And thirdly, the media landscape and propaganda. What's happening with that? Some Russian speakers continue to live in the information bubble of Russian channels. No, not like that. Like this, what, that's not right, that's not right. that it's like this, that it's not right, that's not right, this is not right, that's not right, that's not right, like this, like this. They repeat the crooked line of the Kremlin. This creates divisions within the community and families. Some people live in the reality of the U.S. and in Russia, it's like this, like this. It's not so simple in Russia. It's not so simple, it's television. Fourth, fears at the intersection of two systems. Some people are afraid that the Russian Federation will try to use international mechanisms to put pressure. Some are afraid that the U.S. will someday tighten the rules for those who are on Russian blacklists. Like, if Trump makes a deal with Putin, they'll start catching us here, and that's where the catch is. A little later, we'll talk about how Russian speakers in the U.S. have already learned to use the American legal system and politics to protect themselves and their loved ones from this very pressure. What can we do? What can even an ordinary person without connections or money do? It's not magic, but concrete steps. They can be taken. You can find out and follow the asylum visa status of those who don't have a U.S. passport yet. Life often feels like endless waiting. You wait for the asylum interview, you wait for the green card decision, you wait for the work visa extension, you wait for a letter from USCIS, and you never know if it's good news or a new quest, as they say. There are a few tense moments. The first is the political pendulum. One administration eases the rules, another tightens them. Today, the focus is on humanitarian grounds. Tomorrow, it's on border security. And you depend not only on the law, but also on who is in the White House and what their priorities are. The second thing is the overload of the system. Naturally, there are years-long lines, cases that sit without progress, court hearings that get postponed 5 times, and that's if you're lucky, only 5 times. People living in limbo. It's very hard to live like that. They don't know if they can take out a mortgage, bring their parents over, change jobs, or invest in long-term projects. The third is dependence on the employer. For those on H-1B and similar visas, getting fired isn't just about money. It's also a countdown of how many days are left before their status is violated and what to do next. Here, the economy, politics, and personal life are tied together in one very tight knot. 4 is invert. Information chaos, rumors and chats, contradictory, absolutely contradictory, advice on the same page, stories from acquaintances instead of proper legal consultation. These stories from acquaintances are almost always completely fantastical and have nothing to do with reality. Against this background, it's easy to take a step that will be very hard to fix later. It's very important not to act impulsively. Here's an important point I mentioned earlier. There is one typical mistake Russian speakers in the U.S. make. They see the immigration system as purely a technical thing and don't connect it to politics at all. But in reality, the outcome of your case depends on what agenda society hears, who shapes the opinion about migration, and who represents Russian speakers in politics and the media. A bit later, I'll show how you can use this to your advantage. Russian speakers and American politics, from viewers to participants. Now about what turns many people off from politics in the U.S. Many of us came here with a firm intention to stay out of politics after our experience in Russia. That's understandable, but the problem is that politics here affects us, even if we don't influence it, even if we don't try to participate in it. Russian speakers in the U.S. are not just voters, but also donors. Well, sometimes it's just $1, $20, or $100, but it still counts. Volunteers from the Golosa organization at town hall meetings, people who can explain to politicians how their decisions affect the real lives of the diaspora. Some people vote for Republicans, some for Democrats, and some ignore the elections altogether. But regardless of your views, there is a common decision about whether to give or not to give. And for everyone, including the free world, the majority of democratic Russia and the USA, how should they relate to sanctions and to Russians in general? Of course, that's in a vacuum. No, all of this is formed in the political process in which you and I can participate. What are we already doing? We vote for those, well, so to speak, for those we can or want to vote for. We go to rallies against the war and for the rights of refugees. We help journalists, human rights activists with information and expertise. and we create our own media projects. What needs to be strengthened? We need to organize influence groups at least at the state or city level so that local politicians have a clear point of contact with the Russian-speaking community. We need to explain that having a Russian passport does not mean supporting the Kremlin, and very often it's quite the opposite. We need to stand up for our interests, from school boards to congressmen, and this is exactly what I promised to talk about. There is a very practical mechanism that almost no one uses. When changes concerning migrants, refugees, or sanctions are discussed at the federal or state level, you can not only like a post, but also officially submit comments, participate in public hearings, and write to the offices of elected representatives. It's important for politicians to see real people behind the statistics, not just 134 people, right?
А конкретный человек.
Take the time, come, explain something. When dozens or hundreds of meaningful messages come from Russian speakers, it changes the tone of the discussions. And this is something you can do. And it's not just activists who can do this, but ordinary people too. It's a matter of skill, not status or even time. It takes so little time that it's hardly even worth mentioning. To truly live here without cutting yourself off from your roots. And now we come to the main question, are we here temporarily or for good? For many, the answer is painful. Some people hold on to the thought until the very end. We'll go back when things change there. Others have already accepted, my life is here, my children are here, and that's okay. And some people just can't bring themselves to answer honestly so it doesn't hurt for either there or here. There are a few things that are incredibly important to say out loud. First, your children will grow up in American reality, whether you like it or not. They, gentlemen, are Americans, and it's up to us whether they will just be people who are embarrassed to speak Russian and cut off part of their history, or people who have two languages, two cultural codes, and a much broader horizon than their classmates. Second, our experience is needed. America benefits from the perspective of people who know what a state without an independent court and a normal opposition is like. The future of Russia, whatever it may be, will benefit from the experience of the diaspora that has learned to live within functioning institutions. Third, the eternal mode of, let's wait a couple more years is the path to waking up at 60 and realizing that what was temporary has become forever. At some point, it's important to start truly living here. What does that mean? To use your rights, to build connections, to invest in the local community, yes, to invest in the local community, at the same time preserving the language, memory, and connection with those who stayed there. It's not contradictory, it's not the opposite of each other. And here is the very impactful thing I promised at the beginning. Right now, Russian speakers in the U.S. are at a unique point. We simultaneously understand how Russian reality works. We see American democracy from the inside with all its pros and cons, the cons as well, and maybe a bridge that will very soon become either a key resource or a lost opportunity. If we split up into our small diaspora circles, reduce ourselves to everyday chats and kitchen conversations, in a few years we'll be remembered as just another wave of immigration. What were they called? You know, those ones. If we start building networks, learning to use the tools of American democracy, helping each other and speaking out on our own behalf, we'll have a chance to influence our own future. How Russian speakers will be perceived in this country, and also the future of our children. And in the next videos, I want to discuss 3 things separately. How Russian speakers can safely and effectively participate in the political life of the U.S. without risking your safety or your loved ones, how to discuss Russia with children, about the war, about identity so as not to traumatize them and not to lie under any circumstances, and how to use local institutions from schools to courts to protect your rights. So if you don't want to miss any of this, don't forget to hit the bell. Then new episodes will arrive on time and not just randomly through recommendations. Or in some other way, write in the comments. Where do you live in the U.S.? How did you get here? And at what stage did you temporarily settle? I doubt it. If you've watched up to this point, you're definitely not outside of politics anymore. You're already participating in at least one important process in an honest conversation about our life here. Until next time.